In this mini-series we're going to be covering long reining and everything you need to know about it. Whether you're a complete beginner or have long reined before, we hope you'll enjoy these videos and learn something new. So firstly, what is long reining? Long reining is a type of groundwork that involves working the horse with the use of two long reins. There's a few variations in methods. There's the French method, the Danish method, the English method and the Viennese method. Each use slightly different equipment and work the horses slightly different ways. So you might use different methods for different horses to gain a slightly different outcome. It's all dependent on what you want out of your horse at that moment in time or during that session. There's nothing wrong with mixing it up, so don't think you've got to stick to just one method. Generally speaking, here in the UK, long reining is more commonly used for young horses that are just starting their working career, so it's no surprise either that the most commonly used method here is the English method. Once they're backed and riding under saddle, long reining is quite often forgotten about, which is a real shame. It's a really useful tool to continue to develop the horse from the ground. Using long reining in your horse's routine is quite helpful as well to give them a break from riding whilst not continuously lunging them on circles. You can still exercise your horse in ways that are beneficial. I like to try to long rein mine at least once a week and I find it's quite enjoyable as well. Long reins can be used to teach a horse all the way up to Grand Prix, and in classical training it's not that uncommon to see horses at this level working in the long reins. A quote from Sylvia Stainer's book, The Art of Long Reining, which I highly recommend reading. When to start a horse on long reins and how long to stay with the method is a matter of personal preference. Once a youngster will carry a roller and lunge well, a course of 3 or 4 weeks on long reins can be very beneficial. For this work, I would probably advocate the English method, working the horse each day throughout the course for approximately 20 minutes. For a dressage horse of elementary level or above, I would most certainly use the Danish method, through which greater elevation of the forehand and greater collection can be attained more correctly. With such a horse, I would probably use the long reins once or twice a week, more if necessary, all through his competitive career, again for approximately 20 minutes at a time. So I think it's quite important to note that Sylvia states, before attempting to long rein your horse, they must lunge well and be used to a roller. If you skip ahead before your horse is ready, this could make things very difficult and most likely dangerous for you both. As with everything, it's really important to take your time. I think it's really quite interesting as well that Sylvia mentions a course of 3 to 4 weeks in the long reins for a young horse is hugely beneficial, but yet how many horses are broken from scratch in a mere 6 weeks? So that's something to think about. Over the years, different methods of long reining have developed through the various different schools of equitation. The Danish method is derived from the old Neapolitan style, which sees the horse wearing a driving pad or roller with turrets. The long reins pass through the turrets and attach to the bit rings, or if you prefer, a cavesson head collar. In the Danish method, the reins don't usually go around the back of the horse and around their hocks, but across their back instead. Horses can be schooled to a very high level using this method, and it encourages a very light contact and good stealth carriage. Now in the English method, the horse wears either a roller or a saddle with stirrup irons. It's important that stirrup irons are tied together and secured, usually with a stirrup leather underneath the horse. This is so the stirrups don't raise up with the lines or fly out to the side when you're on a circle or turning, which can obviously spook your horse. If you're using a roller, the lines are usually passed through the lowest ring, and if you're using a saddle, they're obviously passed through the secured stirrups. Generally, if you're using a saddle and stirrups, the lines will run a little bit lower than if you're using a roller. The reins are used around the back of the horse and past their hocks. This is generally the preferred method for starting horses. It can be quite helpful for mouthing horses, although I suggest using a cavesson at the beginning, and it'd be quite helpful for getting them to start understanding basic aids such as turning. One downside to this method though is that because the lines run quite low, it's quite easy for the horse to overbend, so you do need to be careful of this. So the French method was developed at the French military school at Saumur. Their method includes the use of a collar as well as a roller, which is meant to discourage the horse from lowering the neck and overbending too much. One that's seen a lot in classical schooling is the Viennese method. With this method there's no roller involved, only the lines attached directly to the bridle or the cavesson. This means that you can position the reins wherever you need to in order to position your horse in a certain way. The rider walks closely to the side of the horse's hindquarters, which enables them to use small precise aids to achieve what they need to. Horses can be trained again all the way up to the high school movements using this method too. So having an understanding of each method means you can pick and choose which ones work best for you and your horse. Personally, I use a mixture of the Danish, English and Viennese methods and generally change it up every session and between different horses depending on what I'm working on. Let's start at the beginning and assume that your horse has never long reined before. We've established that they need to lunge well. I'd like to be confident that the horse will walk, trot and halt when told with either voice or body commands before I introduce the long reins. If that's not the case, then I would continue to lunge and work on those things. I also want to make sure that the horse is used to having a roller on and it tightened, and that it's comfortable with moving in the walk and trot with it on. Assuming that that's all good, then we're good to go. We're going to follow the English method for this session, and if you can and are able to, it can be really helpful to have another person on the ground to help when needed. To start your session, you will need your horse, obviously, 2 lunge lines of roughly the same length. I tend to have 2 different colours so that if you do get in a pickle, it's easy to see which one is attached to which side. You need a roller or your saddle. If you're using a saddle, don't forget that you need to secure the stirrups. I don't tend to do much long reining in the beginning with the saddle on, or at least not until they're happy wearing a saddle in other situations first, so like lunging or leading out in hand. You'll need your bridle or cavesson. If there is a young horse and you've not done any in hand work and they're not used to having a contact on the bridle, then I'd suggest you use a cavesson. I still have the bridle on underneath so you can still work the horse with its bit in, but you're not putting any pressure on the mouth yet when they're not used to what you're going to ask them to do. Please don't forget to wear a hat, appropriate footwear and a pair of gloves. Rope burn is really nasty, and no matter how careful or well behaved your horse is, it can happen, so it's better to be safe. So the first thing I do with a horse that's never long reined before is to introduce them to the lines. They know what it is because they're used to being lunged by this point, however they're not used to it touching their sides or their hind end, so this can be a little bit scary for some horses. This is where your helper may need to come in and just hold your horse. If your horse knows to stand still and you've taught them to stand whilst you walk all the way around them, which you can see how to do on our clicker training video on standing still. If they can do this, then you might be okay to do this on your own, but please exercise caution and just keep an eye on your horse's posture and if they're okay with what you're doing or not. I simply do this with one line attached as you would for lunging. I ask my horse to stand still or have someone hold them, and gradually I go further and further back, touching the line on the horse until I can safely touch the back of the horse with a line with no reaction. If your horse does react, then take a step back and stay at that step until your horse is confident with it. If you're using clicker training, then use the same principles to help your horse accept the lines. Don't forget to do this both sides. Generally our horses are used to being interacted with on their near side, but when we switch sides to the off side, then that can be a whole different ball game. So bear that in mind, not just with the long reining, but with everything that you do with your horse. Once your horse is happy with the lines around their body, then you can start to prepare your horse to long rein. I always start my horse's long reining with the inside rein attached directly to the bit and not yet through either the roller or the stirrup. This is because if things do get a bit hairy, you can use the inside rein to help control things without levering the horse's head into its chest and to the inside. It's much more comfortable for the horse to start with, as it's quite similar to lunging, which they're used to, as well as it being safer if something were to happen. To quote Sylvia Stainer again, never put both reins through the turret until the horse is completely calm and used to the reins. So leaving the inside rein attached only to the bit ring, from the inside of the horse I pass the clip end of the second line over the horse's back and drop it down until it hits the floor. Again, I do it this way because if the horse rushes forward or gets spooked, they're not going to get tangled up in the second line. I then swap sides around the front of the horse, run the second outside rein through the ring or stirrup and attach it to the bit or the cavesson. The remainder of the second line is still on the floor on the inside of the horse because, again, if they're spooked and run forward, they're not going to get tangled in it. Once you've attached it, you can return to the inside, keeping your horse stood either with your handler or, again, if you can trust them to stand still. Pick up both lines in your coinciding hands. Make sure they're not looped around your hands, and gently ask your horse to walk on a circle, just as if you're lunging. If you need your helper to walk around a few times with the horse, that's absolutely fine, and it can really help your horse to grasp what's going on. At this stage, the outside rein stays just across the horse's back. I don't tend to put it around their back end until I'm happy that they're happy, otherwise you can end up horse skiing and being dragged across the arena because it can quite often frighten them. Now you have an outside rein that you can use to help stop your horse from falling in. I wouldn't use it too much in the beginning until they're used to this, but it generally doesn't take too long. When you're ready, bring your horse down to a halt. If needed, get your helper to hold the horse again and gather up the reins whilst you approach them. Now all you need to do is swap the reins over. I'd do this in exactly the same way that you started, so there's no danger of getting tangled up. Repeat exactly what you did on the other rein on this rein. It doesn't matter if for the first few times you only walk and practice some halts. If your horse feels comfortable enough to trot, then that's great too, but don't think that you have to. I'd try to keep your first session short, around 20 minutes maximum. Some horses may only need a couple of sessions like this until they're comfortable and ready for the next step. Others may need more. It's not a race, so don't worry if it takes you longer. It'll be worth it in the long run. So next time we'll be looking at attaching both reins through the turrets or the stirrup, how to change reins safely while still moving, and starting to long rein your horse from behind, so looking at more of the ground driving. But until then, practice this and let us know how you get on.